Fact number one, observing the Sabbath is a matter of personal choice. Paul clearly said that one person would consider every day alike, and another person would consider one day as being more special than the other, but let each man be fully convinced in his own mind.
It never fails that when you bring up the seventh-day Sabbath and the Christian's responsibility to keep it, you'll have someone bringing up Romans 14 as a proof text for why they don't have to keep it according to the commandment in Exodus 20 verse 8. The problem with applying this verse the way they do is that nowhere in chapter 14 or anywhere else in the whole letter to the Romans is the word Sabbath even mentioned. You have to literally insert this word into the text. So if Romans 14 isn't about the Sabbath, what is the proper interpretation? If you look at verse 1, you'll see the entire context of this chapter is disputes over doubtful things or matters of opinion. Well, that immediately rules out the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is a commandment, and commandments are not matters of opinion for followers of Christ. I think God made it quite clear in Numbers chapter 15 that keeping the Sabbath day holy was not a matter of personal preference. So, what is the matter of personal preference concerning days that we shouldn't judge others for doing or not doing? The same thing that John's disciples should not have judged Christ's disciples for not doing in Matthew 9. Then the disciples of John came to him, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" They asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples not fast?" We do. Judgment. Fasting is certainly not a popular expression of the faith today, but it was in Paul's days. And apparently it was most common to set aside specifically 2 days during the week to fast. This is why in Jesus' lesson on justification in Luke 18, the Pharisee says, "I fast twice a week." So Paul must have been addressing a group of believers that were judging their brothers for not fasting on the days that they were fasting. So is it unchristian to fast? Not at all. Jesus said that there would be a time when his disciples would fast after he leaves earth. But what his disciples should not do is hold their brothers and sisters to certain days of the week to fast just because they chose these certain days. Why? Because there's nowhere in God's law where he commands his people to fast on specific days of the week. This is why it's a matter of opinion. Believers have the liberty to choose when they're going to fast, and that might look different from person to person. So don't argue about it. This is why Paul says, "He who observes the day observes it to the Lord, and he who does not observe the day to the Lord he does not observe it. He who eats, eats to the Lord, for he gives God thanks, and he who does not eat, to the Lord he does not eat, and gives God thanks." Unfortunately, this wasn't only an issue in the first century, it seemed to be an ongoing issue even leading up to the early 2nd century, as shown in an early 2nd century document called the Didache, where the writer instructs Christians not to fast on the same day as the hypocrites, but instead they're to fast on the 4th and 6th day of the week. Who are these hypocrites? Probably a reference to Pharisees, as we see in Luke 18. But after all this, if you think I'm just making this up, consider that even this man, referred to as an early church father by many in Eastern Orthodox and Catholic churches, didn't conclude that these verses were in reference to Sabbath days either. Here it seems to me that Paul is giving a subtle hint about fasting, for it is probable that those who fasted were always passing judgment on those who did not, and it is likely that some of those who fasted did so on particular days. Paul releases those who fasted out of fear from their bondage by saying that it is something which was basically indifferent. So next time your Christian brother or sister uses Romans 14 to explain why they don't keep the 7th-day Sabbath, remind them that this text has nothing to do with their obligation to learn and practice the commandments of God as faithful disciples of Christ.